Dogs don't bark at empty trees for no reason. The words stayed in Officer Caleb Hayes' mind as Atlas lunged against the leash for the third time that night. Snow drifted sideways through the Montana forest, hissing against the pine needles and coating the narrow trail in white. The temperature had already dropped below 20 degrees, cold enough that Caleb could see every breath rolling from Atlas' muzzle like smoke. But the German shepherd didn't care about the cold. He stood frozen in front of a dead oak tree, ears pinned back, chest heaving, barking with a desperation Caleb had only heard once before during a search and rescue mission overseas. "Atlas," Caleb muttered, tightening his grip on the flashlight. "Easy, boy." The dog ignored him completely. Atlas had worked beside Caleb for nearly 4 years. Gunfire never shook him. Thunder never rattled him. But tonight, something inside that hollow tree terrified him. The woods around them felt wrong. Too quiet. No wind in the branches. No distant howl of coyotes. Just the creak of old wood and the sharp rhythm of Atlas barking into the darkness. Caleb swept the flashlight upward. The oak towered over them like a black skeleton, its trunk split down the middle from an old lightning strike years ago. Most people in Bitter Creek avoided this stretch of forest after dark. Kids in town whispered stories about the tree. Hunters claimed their radios died near it. Caleb never believed any of it. Until now. Atlas suddenly growled low in his throat and began clawing at the snow near the roots. Hard. Dirt and ice sprayed backward as his paws tore into the frozen ground. "Hey!" Caleb stepped closer. "Stop!" But Atlas kept digging, frantic now, whimpering between barks. Caleb's stomach tightened when he noticed blood spotting the snow beneath the dog's paws. Atlas never hurt himself unless he believed someone was in danger. The beam of Caleb's flashlight drifted toward the opening in the trunk. Inside, the hollow center looked impossibly deep, swallowing the light after only a few feet. A sour smell drifted out. Wet bark, rotting leaves, something older underneath it, something that made the back of Caleb's neck tighten. Then came the sound. Knock, knock. Caleb froze. His breath caught in his throat as the noise echoed softly from inside the tree. Not loud, not violent, just slow, hollow, deliberate. Atlas backed away from the trunk with a sharp whine, his amber eyes fixed on the darkness. Caleb's pulse hammered in his ears. "Someone out there?" he called, voice rough against the cold air. Silence answered him. Then another knock. Closer this time. Caleb swallowed hard and stepped toward the tree, boots crunching through the snow. His flashlight trembled slightly as he leaned toward the hollow opening. At first he saw nothing except darkness and tangled roots buried beneath layers of frozen dirt. Then the beam caught something small wedged between the roots. A bracelet, rusted silver, tiny enough for a child's wrist. Caleb crouched slowly, brushing snow away with gloved fingers until faded pink letters appeared beneath the rust. His stomach dropped. Atlas let out a long, mournful whine behind him. Because Caleb realized the name engraved on the bracelet belonged to a little girl who had disappeared from Bitter Creek 12 years ago. The name on the bracelet was Emily Carter. Caleb stared at the faded pink letters while snow gathered silently across the shoulders of his jacket. For a moment, the forest around him disappeared. He remembered the photographs taped across every storefront in Bitter Creek 12 years earlier. A little blonde girl with missing front teeth and bright blue mittens. 8 years old. Vanished without a trace after walking home from school one November afternoon. People searched these woods for weeks. Volunteers came from 3 counties away. Helicopters circled overhead. Dogs tracked her scent to the edge of the forest and then lost it completely near Black Hollow Ridge. Near this tree, Caleb had only been 26 back then, serving overseas with the Marines, but he remembered hearing about the case from his father during a satellite call. The entire town broke apart afterward. Marriages failed. People locked their doors at night. Parents stopped letting their children walk anywhere alone. And Emily's mother never left Bitter Creek again. Atlas stepped closer beside him now, breathing heavily, eyes locked on the hollow trunk. Caleb noticed the dog trembling. Not from cold. From something deeper. "You knew something was here," Caleb whispered. Atlas answered with a low whine and nudged Caleb's shoulder with his nose. The sound from inside the tree came again. Knock. Slow. Hollow. Caleb's pulse quickened. He rose carefully and aimed the flashlight into the opening once more. The beam slid deeper this time, revealing twisted roots curling downward into darkness like skeletal fingers. Snowflakes drifted through the crack in the trunk, disappearing into the black center below. Then Caleb saw something else. Fabric. Faded blue cloth half buried beneath dirt and dead leaves. His throat tightened. Dispatch, this is Officer Hayes. His voice crackled through the radio clipped to his coat. I need backup at Black Hollow Ridge. Possible evidence recovery. Static hissed back. Then silence. Caleb frowned and checked the signal. Nothing. The radio was dead. Atlas suddenly barked sharply toward the woods behind them. Caleb spun around, flashlight cutting through the trees. Empty forest. Pine branches swaying gently in the wind. But the uneasy feeling remained, like someone standing just beyond the light. Watching, Caleb swallowed hard and crouched beside the trunk again. He brushed more snow aside until his fingers struck metal beneath the roots. A small tin box, rusted almost black with age. Atlas immediately backed away and let out another mournful cry. Easy boy. Caleb pulled the box free slowly. The lid resisted at first before opening with a brittle creak. Inside sat several water-damaged items wrapped in what remained of a child's sweater. A tiny flashlight, 2 Polaroid photographs stuck together, and a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. Caleb carefully unfolded it, his gloved hands trembling slightly in the cold. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, clearly written by a child. Dear Mom, I am still waiting in the dark. Caleb stopped breathing. Snow hissed softly around him as Atlas lowered himself onto the frozen ground beside the tree, ears flattened, eyes filled with a sadness Caleb had never seen before. Then somewhere deep inside the hollow trunk, something shifted. Caleb slowly lowered the letter back into the tin box, but his eyes could not leave the final line. Dear Mom, I am still waiting in the dark. The words sat heavy in the freezing air like something unfinished. Atlas remained motionless beside the tree, staring into the hollow trunk with his ears flattened tightly against his head. Snow gathered across his dark fur, but the dog did not move. Caleb had seen that posture before during military patrols overseas. It was how dogs reacted when danger lingered nearby long after human eyes failed to notice it. The sound came again, a faint scrape from deep beneath the roots. Caleb tightened his grip on the flashlight and stepped closer to the opening. Hello. His voice echoed weakly into the hollow center. No answer, just the groan of old wood shifting somewhere inside the massive trunk. The flashlight beam slid downward, catching narrow tunnels twisting beneath the roots like veins under skin. Then Caleb noticed small marks carved into the wood along the inner wall. Lines, tiny scratches stacked one above another. He counted slowly. 1, 2, 3, more than 20. His stomach turned cold. Atlas suddenly stood and barked sharply toward the darkness inside the trunk. The bark echoed through the woods and then died instantly, swallowed by the snow and trees. Caleb swallowed hard. What happened here? He whispered. A gust of icy wind rushed through the forest, carrying the sharp scent of pine sap and frozen earth. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled across the mountains. Caleb pulled the old Polaroid photographs from the box and carefully separated them. The first showed Emily Carter sitting beside a lake in summer sunlight, smiling with 2 missing front teeth and holding a stuffed rabbit against her chest. The second photograph made Caleb freeze. A man stood beside Emily with one hand resting gently on her shoulder. His face was partly shadowed beneath a baseball cap, but Caleb recognized him instantly. Sheriff Warren Doyle, the former sheriff of Bitter Creek, dead for almost 5 years now after suffering a heart attack during retirement. Caleb stared at the photograph as snow drifted silently around him. Warren Doyle had led the original search for Emily. He organized the volunteers, comforted the family, spoke at the candlelight vigil in front of Town Hall. Caleb remembered watching the old sheriff place his arm around Emily's mother while promising the town he would never stop looking for her. Atlas let out a deep growl. Caleb looked up sharply. The dog was staring into the woods again, body tense, tail stiff. Then Caleb heard footsteps crunching faintly through snow somewhere beyond the trees. Slow, heavy. His pulse quickened instantly. Who is out there? He shouted, standing quickly and sweeping the flashlight toward the darkness. Nothing answered. The woods remained empty except for drifting snow and black pine trunks stretching endlessly into the night. But Caleb knew he heard something. Atlas knew it too. The German shepherd moved closer until his shoulder pressed firmly against Caleb's leg. Protective. Grounding. Caleb exhaled slowly, forcing his breathing steady. Then his flashlight beam caught something else near the base of the hollow trunk. Another piece of paper partly hidden beneath wet leaves. He crouched carefully and pulled it free. Unlike the letter inside the box, this page looked newer. The ink had faded, but not completely. Only 3 words were written across the center in trembling handwriting. He comes back here. Caleb's breath fogged heavily in front of him as Atlas suddenly began barking wildly toward the darkness behind them again, louder now, more desperate than before. Atlas barked so violently that steam burst from his muzzle into the frozen air like smoke from a furnace. Caleb spun toward the trees again, flashlight cutting through the darkness in sharp, trembling arcs. "Show yourself," he shouted. His voice disappeared into the storm rolling across Black Hollow Ridge. Nothing moved except the snow drifting between the pines. But the feeling remained. Someone had been there, watching. Caleb trusted that instinct because Atlas trusted it first. The German shepherd suddenly lunged several feet forward, claws tearing through snow as he growled low and deep toward a narrow path descending into the woods. Caleb grabbed the leash with both hands. "Atlas." The dog stopped but refused to look away from the trail. His body remained stiff as stone. Caleb followed the direction of Atlas' stare and noticed something half hidden between the trees nearly 30 yards downhill. A faint yellow glow. The old instinct from his marine days whispered inside him now. "Slow down. Observe. Listen." The forest carried sounds differently at night. Every branch creak felt deliberate. Every gust of wind sounded almost human. Caleb crouched beside the hollow tree once more and looked carefully at the second note in his hand. "He comes back here." The words no longer felt like a warning left years ago. They felt recent, immediate, alive. Caleb scanned the snow around the roots more carefully. His flashlight caught shallow impressions partially hidden beneath fresh snowfall. Boot prints. Large. Adult size. His stomach tightened. The prints were not old. The edges remained sharp, untouched by ice. Somebody had stood here recently. Very recently. Atlas suddenly whimpered and pawed lightly at the base of the hollow trunk again, gentler this time. Caleb knelt beside him and brushed away more snow and dead leaves until his fingers struck wood beneath the roots. Not roots. A small hidden door built into the base of the trunk. Caleb stared at it in disbelief. The wood blended almost perfectly with the tree itself, hidden beneath years of dirt and moss. "Jesus," he whispered. Atlas backed away immediately, ears pinned tight against his skull. Caleb pulled his pocket knife free and carefully wedged the blade beneath the edge. The hidden panel resisted at first before finally cracking open with a brittle groan. A rush of stale air drifted upward from the darkness below. Damp earth. Mold. Something ancient. Caleb aimed the flashlight downward and his breath caught instantly. A narrow tunnel disappeared beneath the tree roots into the ground below. Not natural. Man-made. Wooden support beams lined the walls, half rotted with age. The tunnel stretched perhaps 20 feet before vanishing into darkness. Caleb's pulse thundered in his ears. "Atlas, stay close." The dog refused to enter. Instead, he stood at the opening whining softly, paws planted firmly in the snow. Caleb had never seen Atlas afraid to follow him anywhere before. Not into abandoned houses, not into flood zones, not into gunfire. But tonight the dog would not step inside that tunnel. Caleb swallowed hard and climbed down slowly, boots crunching against frozen dirt. The tunnel ceiling hung low enough that he had to duck his head. Water dripped steadily somewhere deeper ahead. The flashlight beam shook slightly in his hand as he moved forward inch by inch. Then the tunnel opened into a small underground chamber hidden beneath the tree roots. Caleb froze. Children's drawings covered the walls. Faded crayon sketches protected behind cracked plastic sheets. Smiling stick figures. A yellow sun. A house beside a lake. In one corner sat a tiny pink backpack covered in dust. Atlas barked wildly from above. Caleb turned sharply toward the far wall of the chamber as the flashlight beam landed on something hanging there in the darkness. A sheriff's jacket. Old. Weather-stained. And stitched clearly above the pocket were the words Warren Doyle. Caleb stared at the sheriff's jacket hanging silently against the dirt wall while cold water dripped somewhere in the darkness behind him. Warren Doyle's badge still clung to the chest pocket beneath layers of dust and mildew. The silver star caught the flashlight beam for just a second before fading back into shadow. Atlas barked again from above the tunnel entrance, sharp and urgent now. Caleb turned slowly, every instinct inside him screaming that something about this place was wrong in a way he could not yet explain. The underground chamber felt preserved in time, forgotten by the world but not abandoned. Someone had returned here over the years. The evidence was everywhere. A lantern sat in one corner beside several melted candles. Empty canned food rested near the wall beneath a pile of old blankets. None of it looked 12 years old. Caleb swallowed hard and crouched beside the pink backpack. The zipper stuck halfway before finally opening. Inside were children's books warped from moisture, a stuffed rabbit missing one button eye, and several folded notebook pages covered in crayon writing. Emily's writing. Caleb carefully unfolded one page and aimed the flashlight closer. The letters were shaky but readable. Mr. Doyle said I have to stay quiet until my mom stops crying. Caleb felt his stomach knot painfully. Another page. He said bad people are looking for me. Another. He promised I can go home soon. Caleb lowered the paper slowly, unable to steady his breathing anymore. Above him, the storm intensified. Wind howled faintly through the hollow trunk overhead, while snow sifted down through cracks in the roots like pale ash. Atlas suddenly growled deep and vicious. Caleb looked toward the tunnel entrance just as a faint crunch echoed from above. Footsteps. Somebody was moving near the tree again. Caleb immediately killed the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the chamber whole. His pulse hammered violently against his ribs, while Atlas barked in furious bursts somewhere above. Caleb remained perfectly still, listening. Another crunch. Slow. Careful. Deliberate. Whoever stood outside the tree was trying not to be heard. Caleb's marine instincts took over instantly. He crouched low against the dirt wall, controlling his breathing as he listened to the rhythm of movement overhead. One person. Heavy boots. Adult male, judging by the weight and stride. Atlas snarled loudly enough to echo through the tunnel. Then came a voice from above. Old. Raspy. Easy there, dog. Caleb froze. The voice carried the rough crackle of age, but something about it felt horribly familiar. Atlas barked again, louder now, refusing to back down. Caleb slowly reached for his sidearm, but stopped himself. The voice continued. You should not have come back here. Caleb's throat tightened instantly. Come back. Not come here. Come back. The words echoed strangely through the chamber beneath the tree roots. Caleb carefully peeked toward the tunnel entrance. A faint lantern glow appeared above, casting long trembling shadows down the dirt walls. Then a figure stepped partially into view near the top of the tunnel. An older man wearing a thick canvas coat dusted with snow. Gray beard. Broad shoulders despite his age. The lantern light flickered across his face for only a second before Caleb recognized him. Deputy Walter Grayson. Retired. 72 years old. Warren Doyle's former partner. Caleb's pulse dropped into ice. Walter had helped lead the search for Emily all those years ago. He attended every memorial, every fundraiser, every vigil. Atlas lunged violently toward the old man, barking with a rage Caleb had never seen before. Walter stared down into the tunnel with tired eyes filled not with anger, but grief. I told Warren this place should have burned with us, he whispered hoarsely. Caleb slowly stood from the darkness below. Walter, he said carefully, what happened to that little girl? The old man's face trembled in the lantern light as snow swirled behind him through the hollow tree. For several long seconds, he said nothing at all. Then his eyes drifted toward the sheriff's jacket hanging behind Caleb. We were supposed to protect her, he whispered. The old man stood motionless beneath the falling snow, lantern shaking faintly in his weathered hand, while Atlas continued growling like a warning pulled straight from his soul. Caleb climbed slowly from the tunnel beneath the tree, every nerve inside him stretched tight. The freezing wind carried the scent of pine and wet earth across Black Hollow Ridge, but beneath it now lingered something heavier. Regret. Walter Grayson looked older than Caleb remembered, smaller somehow. His gray beard was covered in snowflakes, and deep lines carved through his face like cracks in old stone. But his eyes were what unsettled Caleb most. They looked exhausted, like a man who had been carrying something unbearable for too many years. Atlas moved directly in front of Caleb, body low and tense. refusing to let the old deputy get closer. Walter glanced at the dog and gave a sad nod. "Good animal," he whispered. "He knows." Caleb stepped forward carefully. "Knows what?" Walter looked toward the hollow tree behind them. The dead oak groaned softly as wind moved through its broken trunk. "That some places keep memories," he said quietly. "And some memories do not stay buried." Caleb tightened his jaw. "Start talking, Walter." The old man lowered his lantern slightly, the warm glow trembling across the snow between them. Emily was never supposed to disappear. Caleb felt ice crawl through his chest. Walter swallowed hard before continuing. "Warren found her the first night." Atlas let out another low growl. Walter nodded weakly toward the underground chamber beneath the tree. "Cold. Lost. Terrified. But alive." Caleb stared at him in disbelief. "Then why was she never brought home?" Walter closed his eyes briefly, as if the question itself hurt him. Snow gathered across his coat, while silence stretched between the trees. Finally he spoke again, voice cracking. "Because Warren panicked." The wind howled sharply through the ridge as Atlas barked once, furious and sharp. Walter flinched at the sound. "Emily heard something she was not supposed to hear," he whispered. "A conversation between Warren and two men from outside the county. Smuggling money. Corruption. Things that would have destroyed careers and sent people to prison." Caleb felt his pulse hammering in his ears. "So he hit her?" Walter nodded slowly, shame settling heavily across his face. He told himself it was temporary, just until he figured out what to do. Caleb looked back toward the hollow tree, horror spreading through him piece by piece. "Dear God." Walter rubbed trembling hands together against the cold. At first Warren brought her food every day. Books, blankets, toys. He kept telling her she would go home soon. Caleb remembered the children's drawings underground. The stuffed rabbit. The letters. Hope frozen in darkness. Atlas suddenly whimpered softly now, the anger in him fading into something sadder. Walter stared at the dog for several long seconds. "He remembers this place," he whispered. Caleb frowned immediately. "What are you talking about?" Walter pointed slowly toward Atlas. "That dog was here before." Caleb's breath caught. "Impossible." "Not this dog exactly," Walter said quietly. "His mother." The old deputy's voice trembled with memory now. "Warren used AK-9 during the searches back then. A female German shepherd named Grace. Smartest dog I ever saw. She found this tree twice." Atlas stood completely still. Walter continued softly. "Both times Warren pulled her away before she could alert the search teams. After that she kept coming back here on her own. Every chance she got." Caleb looked down at Atlas in stunned silence. The dog stared back toward the hollow trunk beneath the swirling snow, as if listening to something only he could hear. Walter's eyes filled with quiet grief. "Grace had puppies a few months later," he whispered. "One of them was born during the first snowfall of winter." His gaze settled on Atlas. "Same amber eyes. Same white mark on the chest. I would know that bloodline anywhere." Then Atlas suddenly lifted his head toward the forest and barked once more, louder than before, because somewhere deep beyond the trees, another lantern light had appeared. The second lantern drifted slowly between the trees like a ghost moving through snowfall. Atlas immediately stepped forward, barking with fierce warning as his fur bristled along his spine. Caleb instinctively moved beside the dog, one hand near his holster while the freezing wind swept across Black Hollow Ridge in sharp bursts. Walter Grayson stared toward the distant light, with sudden fear spreading across his worn face. "No," he whispered under his breath. "He should not be here." Caleb looked sharply at him. "Who?" But Walter did not answer. The old deputy backed away from the hollow tree slowly, lantern shaking harder now. Atlas growled low enough to vibrate through the snow beneath them. The distant light moved closer between the dark pine trunks until finally a figure emerged from the woods. Tall, heavy coat, broad shoulders bent slightly by age. The stranger carried an old kerosene lantern that cast trembling gold across his weathered face. Caleb felt his pulse stop cold for half a second. The man looked almost identical to Sheriff Warren Doyle from the old photographs. Same sharp jawline, same pale eyes, same calm expression that somehow felt colder than the snow itself. Walter removed his hat slowly. "Ethan," he said weakly. The man stopped several feet away beneath the falling snow. His gaze moved first to Walter, then to Caleb, and finally to Atlas. Something flickered briefly in his eyes when he saw the dog. Recognition. Sadness. Maybe both. I wondered how long it would take, the man said quietly. Caleb frowned. Who are you? The stranger lowered the lantern slightly. Ethan Doyle, Warren's son. The wind hissed through the dead oak behind them. Caleb suddenly remembered hearing years ago that Warren Doyle had a son who left Bitter Creek after his father's death. Nobody had seen him since. Ethan looked toward the hollow tree with tired eyes. I try to keep this place hidden. Atlas barked sharply and stepped protectively in front of Caleb again. Ethan nodded faintly, just like Grace used to. Caleb's throat tightened. You knew about all this? Ethan closed his eyes briefly as snow collected in his dark hair. I found out after my father died. His voice remained calm, but grief weighed heavily beneath every word. The tunnel, the letters, everything. Walter suddenly stepped forward. You should have told the town the truth. Ethan's face hardened instantly. And destroy Emily's mother all over again. Walter looked away in silence. Ethan continued softly. My father spent the last years of his life trying to make peace with what he did. He kept coming back here because he could not forgive himself. Caleb stared toward the hollow tree, trying to piece everything together. What happened to Emily? Ethan swallowed hard before answering. Winter came early that year. The storm trapped her down there longer than my father planned. Silence fell heavily between them. Even the wind seemed quieter for a moment. Atlas slowly lowered his head beside Caleb, a soft whine escaping his throat. Ethan looked at the dog again. Grace never stopped returning to this tree after Emily was gone, he whispered. Every night she broke through fences trying to get back here. Eventually she stopped barking and just sat beside the trunk staring into the woods. Walter rubbed his shaking hands together. She knew. Ethan nodded once. Dogs always know. Caleb looked down at Atlas, realization spreading slowly through him now. The strange behavior, the fear, the pull toward this place. Something deeper than training had guided him here tonight. Something carried through memory and blood. Then Ethan slowly reached inside his coat pocket and pulled out one final folded letter. The paper was old and badly worn at the edges. There is something else, he said quietly. Something my father wrote before he died. Caleb took the letter carefully, while Atlas pressed silently against his leg. Snow drifted between the trees as Caleb unfolded the page beneath the lantern light and read the first line. If anyone ever finds Emily, tell her mother I heard the dog barking that night too. Caleb held the letter with numb fingers while snow drifted silently around the dead oak tree. Atlas pressed close against his leg now, no longer growling, only watching the darkness beneath the branches with heavy amber eyes that seemed far older than any dog should possess. Ethan Doyle lowered his lantern and stared toward the hollow trunk where the underground chamber rested beneath decades of secrets. My father wrote that letter 3 days before he died, he said quietly. He kept it locked in his desk beside Emily's drawings. Walter Grayson stood motionless nearby, shoulders sagging beneath years of guilt. The storm had softened now. Snow fell slower, gentler, like the mountain itself had grown tired of carrying this story. Caleb unfolded the rest of Warren Doyle's letter carefully. The old paper crackled in the cold air as he continued reading beneath the lantern light. I told myself I was protecting her, that I only needed more time. But fear makes cowards out of men who once believed they were good. Caleb swallowed hard. The wind whispered softly through the pine trees around them. Warren's handwriting grew shakier near the bottom of the page. The dog knew before anyone else did. She kept barking at the tree every night. I should have listened. Atlas lowered himself slowly into the snow beside Caleb, resting his head against the officer's boot. Ethan stared at the German shepherd for several seconds before speaking again. Grace stayed beside this ridge until the day she died, he whispered. Every winter she came back here and waited. Caleb looked down at Atlas, his chest tightening painfully now. And somehow he found it too. Walter nodded faintly. Some bonds travel farther than people understand. Silence settled across Black Hollow Ridge. No sirens. No voices. Just falling snow and the groan of the old oak tree standing against the darkness like a grave marker forgotten by time. Caleb slowly climbed back down into the underground chamber beneath the roots. Ethan followed quietly behind him while Walter remained above with Atlas near the opening. The lantern light flickered softly across the walls covered in children's drawings and faded crayon suns. Caleb approached the small pink backpack again and carefully removed the stuffed rabbit from inside. The fabric was worn thin with age, but one ear remained neatly stitched by hand. Emily's mother made this for her, Ethan said softly behind him. Caleb looked toward the far wall where the sheriff's jacket still hung untouched in the shadows. Your father kept all of this. Ethan nodded once. He came down here every week after she was gone. His voice cracked slightly. He cleaned the drawings, replaced the candles, brought flowers sometimes. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. Why did he never confess? Ethan stared downward at the frozen dirt floor. Because by the time he wanted to, he believed the town needed the lie more than the truth. Caleb looked around the hidden chamber again, at the toys and letters and tiny traces of a child who spent her final days waiting to go home. The weight of it settled deep into his chest. Atlas suddenly barked once from above. Not angry this time. Sharp. Alert. Caleb climbed quickly back toward the surface and stopped cold the moment he reached the top. The eastern horizon beyond the mountains had begun to lighten. Dawn was coming. Pale blue light stretched slowly across the snow-covered forest while the storm finally weakened into silence. Atlas stood beside the hollow tree staring toward the sunrise, ears lifted gently now, calm for the first time all night. Walter stepped closer to Caleb with tears frozen along the lines of his face. You are going to tell her mother? Caleb looked toward the waking sky. She deserves to bring her daughter home. Ethan lowered his head quietly while Atlas walked to the base of the dead oak and sat down beside it one final time. The German shepherd pressed his nose lightly against the bark and closed his eyes as wind moved softly through the branches overhead. For a moment nobody spoke, because somehow, in the silence of that frozen ridge, it felt less like a dog saying goodbye and more like an old promise finally being kept. 3 days later, the snow around Black Hollow Ridge began to melt beneath a pale Montana sun. The town of Bitter Creek moved quietly that morning, as if everyone somehow understood that something sacred had finally come home. Caleb stood near the small cemetery chapel at the edge of town, hands buried deep inside his coat pockets, while church bells rang softly through the cold air. Atlas sat beside him beneath the bare branches of an old maple tree, calm and silent now. The German shepherd had not barked once since the night on the ridge. Not at shadows, not at strangers. It was as though the restless weight inside him had finally eased. People filled the chapel slowly. Old volunteers from the original search team, retired firefighters, mothers who still remembered locking their doors 12 winters ago. Walter Grayson entered quietly with his head lowered, carrying a single white rose in trembling hands. Ethan Doyle followed several steps behind him, worn and pale from sleepless nights. Nobody shouted at them. Nobody cursed them. Grief had already done enough damage to Bitter Creek. At the front of the chapel sat Margaret Carter, Emily's mother. Time had silvered her hair and softened her face, but the sorrow in her eyes remained unchanged, like a candle that had burned for too many years without going out. Caleb watched Atlas rise slowly to his feet the moment Margaret entered. The dog walked gently across the wooden floor toward her without command. Every person in the chapel fell silent. Atlas stopped directly beside the elderly woman and lowered his head into her lap. Margaret's hands trembled as she touched the thick fur around his neck. Then quietly, almost like a prayer, she began to cry. You brought my little girl home, she whispered. Atlas closed his eyes beneath her touch. Caleb looked away for a moment because suddenly the room felt too heavy to breathe inside. Outside, snowmelt dripped softly from the church roof, while winter sunlight spilled across the frozen cemetery grass in pale golden streaks. The service remained simple. No speeches about heroes. No excuses. Only truth. Emily Carter's drawings rested beside her photograph near the altar, along with the old stuffed rabbit Caleb found inside the hidden chamber beneath the tree roots. When the pastor finished speaking, nobody moved for several long seconds. The silence itself felt like mourning. Walter Grayson finally stepped forward, placing the white rose beside Emily's picture. Tears slid quietly down the old deputy's face. I am sorry, he whispered. Ethan Doyle stood behind him staring at the floor, carrying the burden of a father he no longer knew how to forgive. Caleb remained near the back of the chapel beside Atlas, listening to the soft creak of wooden pews and distant wind outside the stained glass windows. He thought about Warren Doyle sitting alone beside that hollow tree for years, haunted by the sound of a dog barking into the night. Some sins destroyed people long before death ever reached them. As the townspeople slowly stepped outside into the cold afternoon light, Margaret Carter paused beside Caleb. Her tired eyes drifted toward Atlas once more. "Dogs hear things we do not," she said softly. Caleb looked down at the German shepherd sitting quietly at his side. "Maybe," he answered. Margaret smiled faintly through tears. "No," she whispered. "They remember what we forget." Later that evening, Caleb drove back through Black Hollow Ridge one final time. Snow covered the forest in silver beneath the fading sunset. Atlas lifted his head as they passed the dead oak tree, standing alone among the pines. But this time the dog did not bark. He simply watched the tree disappear slowly into the darkness behind them before resting his head gently against the truck seat. And somewhere beyond the frozen woods, carried softly through the falling night, peace finally answered the silence.